Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm Mark Misha. Basically, wasn't sure how I was going to do this originally, and when I did the audience analysis, when I kind of realized that about half the class didn't know even what the Dead Sea Scrolls were, I decided I was going to try and explain at least something about them and what they are and what they mean to some of the religions in the world today. Basically, they were discovered in 1947 by a young Bedouin goat herd. As a boy about 14 years old, was chasing down a goat in a cave, came across a clay jar, and there were 7 scrolls in it. For about a year or so, he had given it to a dealer, an artifacts dealer. They had no idea what they had at that point. 1948, a academic looked at it, had an idea that it was worth something, and from then on, between 47 and 56, they started doing a lot of excavations there and came up with 11 different caves and about 800 different scrolls. The ruins of Qumran, they associated with them because of the Essenes, which I'll discuss a little bit later, as the authors of the scrolls. Only caves 1 and 11 have produced nearly intact manuscripts. Most of the manuscripts have been partial, which is one of the reasons why they're not sure exactly how many manuscripts they actually have, because they're not sure how to piece some of them together. Cave 4 produced the most. It came up with about 15,000 fragments or so, with more than 500 manuscripts, most being biblical copies of the Old Testament, the Torah, depending on which religion you want to talk about, and which they were. As I said earlier, scholars identified between 825 and 870 scrolls. Most were written in Hebrew. However, the rest were Aramaic, which then led to a greater understanding of that language and enabled us to do better translations in the long run. Some of the biblical scrolls that they came up with was 19 different copies of the book Isaiah. There were 25 copies of the book of Deuteronomy and 30 copies of the book of Psalms. The Isaiah scroll, which was one scroll which was relatively intact, turned out to be one of the oldest copy of any biblical manuscript, and it was over 1,000 years older. Any Old Testament manuscript up until the time that these were discovered were done in the 1st century AD. These scrolls were written as many as 200 years BC, if not older. Some of the scrolls that were not in the Bible that showed up were prophecies by Ezekiel, Jeremiah, Daniel, and a few others that did not make the canons either in the Old Testament or in the Torah. Some of the non-biblical scrolls were commentaries on the Old Testament. Basically what that did was it gave us different views as to how they were seen back then, and it also showed a commonality throughout the history of Judaism and into early Christianity, and to how these books were seen. And it actually showed that the mainstay, it had stayed essentially the same for 6,000 years. There were paraphrases on the law, Moses' law, as well as secular laws as well. There were rule books on the community, basically not necessarily laws, but how you should conduct your daily lives. There were rules on war conduct, such as things like whether or not you took what you did with prisoners, and or whether or not you could take slaves after defeating somebody else. There were Thanksgiving psalms, which were used for Passover and things of that nature. There were hymnic compositions and benedictions. There are actually songs written that were not, again, obviously in the canons in the Bibles. And then there were liturgical texts and wisdom writings, which, again, were not in the canons, but definitely reflected on the religious beliefs at that particular point in time. The Essenes were the people who they assumed wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls for the simple reason that Qumran, which was about 11 miles away, that's where they lived, that's where they stayed. The caves were above the Dead Sea, right there, near, like I said, about 11 miles from Qumran, and they were the only people who typically wrote down a lot of these things. The library was hidden around the first Jewish revolt. That's the uprising, the first Jewish uprising against the Roman Empire. When the Romans were attacking, the Essenes went to Masada. I don't know how many of you all know about Masada, but essentially 900 people committed suicide as opposed to being captured by the Romans there. They were a sect of strict yet non-rabbinic Jews, which is sort of a contradiction. They were very into the Torah, very strict about how they did things, yet by the same token they were waiting for the Messiah to come, and didn't have what you would consider rabbis or priests teaching them. So it was kind of interesting oxymoron there, if you will. Then one of the more interesting scrolls was the Copper Scroll. It was discovered in Cave 3. It contained a list of hiding places thought to be treasures from the Temple of Jerusalem hidden throughout Israel. These contained gold, silver, aromatics, things of that nature, basically to keep it from the Romans to be collected later on. Then just a few other scrolls. The Temple Scroll, one of the things I found interesting about that was it was measured at 26.7 feet and was, they thought, over 28 feet long while intact. Other scrolls contained additional stories of Enoch, Noah, and Abraham. One of the interesting things about the scroll with Abraham was it told the story about why God told him to kill his son. Also found were the last words of Joseph, Judah, Levi, Naphtali, and Amram, who was the father of Moses. And this is just a picture of the Dead Sea area. The spots, these spots here, are markings where the caves are, or Masada, where the last fort was that the Essenes held out, and the city of Qumran. You can see it's how close it is to Jerusalem. And these here, where this is one of the main caves, and that's all I got. Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
I love Indiana Jones. Does that have anything to do with that?
No, not at all.
No,
No, that was Raiders of the Lost Ark. This had nothing to do with the Ark of the Covenant.
It had nothing to do with scrolls?
Nope, not at all.
Did you go see the exhibit like 6 years back?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did. It was awesome. It was one of the most impressive things I've seen.
Yeah, I went to that.